On the morning, she was made to stand like a suspect in the lobby of one of the finest hotels in Toronto. Loretta Eze was wearing her best dress, carrying her late husband's favorite book, and thinking about how proud she was of her daughter. She had ironed the dress the evening before in her room on the 14th floor. The emerald one with the small gold buttons, the one Chioma had sent from a boutique in Montreal 2 Christmases ago, along with a handwritten card that read, "Wear this somewhere beautiful, Mama." Loretta had kept the dress folded in tissue at the back of her wardrobe ever since, waiting for an occasion that felt worthy of it. She had decided, somewhere between Halifax and Toronto, on the overnight train, that this morning qualified. She was 64 years old, and she had made that decision the way she made most of her significant ones. Quietly, without ceremony, without consulting anyone. She had told no one she was coming. Not her neighbor who watered her plants when she traveled. Not her eldest sister in Brampton who would have insisted on driving her instead. And especially not Chioma. Chioma, who was downstairs in the conference rooms of the Fairmont Royal York at that very moment, running through the final logistics of a keynote she had been preparing for months, would have told her not to make the trip, would have said she was too busy, the city was too loud, the hotel was too expensive, that she would come to Halifax instead as soon as the summit was done. Loretta knew all of this and had booked the train ticket anyway. She had spent 31 years as a registered nurse at the QEII Health Sciences Center in Halifax, working overnight shifts through snowstorms, double shifts through flu seasons, quiet holiday shifts when younger nurses with small children had needed to go home to their families. She had raised Chioma largely alone after Emeka died of a cardiac event at 43, leaving behind a small life insurance policy, a battered copy of Things Fall Apart, and a daughter who was 8 years old and already showing the particular intelligence that would eventually take her further from home than either of her parents had ever imagined. Loretta had gone back to work 6 days after the funeral, because the alternative was sitting in a house full of his things and being unable to breathe. She had raised Chioma on the salary of a public sector nurse, in a city where that salary did not go far, and she had done it without complaint, without performance, without asking anyone to notice how hard it was. By the time Chioma was 26, she had co-founded a financial technology company out of a rented apartment in Waterloo, Ontario, with 2 friends from her undergraduate program and a loan she had spent 3 years paying back. By the time she was 32, that company had been valued at over $800 million. By the time she was 38, the number had grown into something that Loretta still could not fully hold in her mind. Though Chioma had explained it to her more than once at the kitchen table in Halifax, over tea, patient and unhurried, the way she did most things. None of that was on Loretta's mind as she came downstairs on Tuesday morning. She was thinking about the card she had written for Chioma, tucked into the front cover of Emeka's book. She was thinking about how she intended to walk into whatever room her daughter was in, set the book on the table in front of her, and say nothing at all. Just sit down and wait for Chioma to open it and find the card. She was thinking about how she had not seen her daughter in 4 months, and how that gap felt longer now than it ever had when Chioma was young, and the distance was only the distance between one part of a small house and another. The lobby of the Fairmont Royal York was already busy at 8:30. Business travelers moved through with the particular efficiency of people whose schedules had been planned before they woke. A family near the revolving door sorted luggage with the cheerful exhaustion of a vacation that had run 1 day longer than anticipated. The concierge desk was occupied by a young woman in a dark blazer who was speaking on the phone with the practiced warmth of someone trained to sound unhurried no matter what. Above the arched entrance to the hotel's grand ballroom, stretching the full width of the passage in letters large enough to read from the far end of the lobby, a banner announced in bold block print, "The Eze-Crawford, Asian Annual Tech Summit, Keynote Speaker, Chioma Eze-Crawford." Beside the text, taking up nearly half the banner, was a photograph of Chioma in the same structured blazer she would be wearing when she stepped onto the stage in under 2 hours. The banner had been there since Sunday evening. Loretta did not see it when she stepped off the elevator. She was looking for a quiet chair. She found one near the center of the lobby, a high-backed armchair beside a low table with a small arrangement of white tulips, and she settled into it with the careful movements of a woman whose knees had begun to register the particular complaint of too many years on hospital floors. She set her purse on her lap, withdrew Amika's book, and opened it to the middle. Not to read, exactly, but to have something in her hands while she waited. She had sent Chioma a message earlier that morning saying she had a small surprise, which was enough to ensure Chioma would check her phone between agenda items. She expected to wait perhaps 20 minutes. And she was content with those 20 minutes the way she was content with most things she had chosen deliberately. She did not notice the security guard watching her from the pillar near the staircase. His name was Bryce. He was 26 years old and 7 months into the position, still very much in the habit of watching the lobby the way he had been told to watch it. Looking for things that seemed out of place, though his understanding of what counted as out of place had never been examined or corrected by anyone above him. He watched Loretta settle into the chair, watched her open the book, and he watched until his shift supervisor, the duty manager, appeared at his shoulder. Raymond Fowler was 51, a precise and humorless man who had spent the better part of 20 years working his way up through hotel management, and who wore the authority of his position the way some men wear a new tie, with great attention to whether it is straight. He had received a call that morning from a guest on the 8th floor who had complained, in terms he later described to a colleague as vague but concerning, about unfamiliar individuals in the common areas. It was exactly the kind of complaint a more experienced manager, or a wiser one, would have noted and set aside without action. Fowler had instead spent the better part of 30 minutes re-examining the lobby with the heightened attention of someone who has been told to find a problem and is determined not to return empty-handed. He crossed the lobby in the particular manner of a man who has convinced himself he is acting reasonably. He stopped in front of her chair, and he smiled the smile that does not reach the eyes. "Good morning, ma'am. Are you a registered guest with us?" Loretta looked up from the book with the patient expression of someone accustomed to being interrupted. "I am," she said. He asked to see her room key. She set the book in her lap and produced the key card from her purse and held it toward him. He examined it longer than the task required. He handed it back without a word of acknowledgement and asked for a piece of photo identification. "Is there a reason for this?" she asked, her voice even and unhurried. "We've had some concerns raised about the lobby area this morning," he said, which was true in the technical sense and misleading in every other one. She withdrew her health card from her wallet and handed it to him. He looked at it and handed it back. He did not step away. Bryce had appeared at the edge of her chair by now, standing close enough to be felt rather than needed, the way young men in positions of partial authority sometimes do when they are not sure what they are there to accomplish, but want to be seen accomplishing it. "I came down to wait for my daughter," Loretta said. "She's speaking at the conference this morning. I wanted to surprise her before she went on." "And your daughter is registered with the conference?" Fowler asked. Something moved across Loretta's face. Not quite hurt, not quite anger, but something that the few people who knew her well would have recognized as the specific weariness of a woman who has answered this particular class of question too many times across too many decades to let it surprise her anymore. "She is," Loretta said. The lobby had begun, in that quiet way that lobbies do, to grow aware of itself. The couple near the elevator bank had stopped scrolling their phones. A man at the table by the window had lowered his copy of the Globe and Mail. The young concierge at the front desk had stopped speaking into her headset, holding it with both hands now, watching. Fowler was not a violent man. He did not shout, did not make a scene in any way that would later be easy to point to as a single clear moment of rupture. What he did was worse in its way. He reached forward and lifted the book from Loretta's lap without asking, without explaining, turning it over in his hands as though examining its provenance. As though it might tell him something about her, that her key card and her health card and her own calm account of herself had failed to reveal. "That is mine," Loretta said, still quiet. "My husband's name is on the inside cover." Fowler opened it, saw the name, Chioma Eze, written in handwriting that had not existed in the world for 25 years. He closed the book and set it back in her lap without a word. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to come with us to the front desk to verify your reservation," he said. "Just a routine step. I've already shown you my key card. We'd like to verify it further." There was a pause. The lobby continued around them. The family at the revolving door, the concierge frozen at her desk, the man at the window who had now folded his paper entirely and set it aside. A woman with a stroller near the entrance had stopped adjusting the canopy. None of them spoke. None of them moved forward into whatever was clearly building. In the middle of the room, the way crowds sometimes absorb a scene without entering it, held back by that particular combination of conscience and fear. Loretta closed the book. She set her purse strap over her shoulder, and she stood, slowly, with the dignity of a woman who has decided that some things are not worth the cost of losing oneself over. She looked at Fowler directly, and she said, "I have not done anything wrong. I want you to carry that with you." It was not a threat, and it was not a plea. It was something between the two. A quiet indictment that a more self-aware man might have felt like a stone settling in his chest. As Bryce moved to direct her toward the front desk, Loretta's phone slipped from the top of her purse and fell to the marble floor. The screen cracked across the corner. A young woman sitting nearby, dark-haired, wearing a conference lanyard, was on her feet before Fowler had even registered what had happened. She picked up the phone and held it out to Loretta without a word. Their eyes met for just a moment. Her name was Faye. She was 29, a junior project manager on Chioma's team, and she had come downstairs only to get a coffee before the morning briefing. She had been watching the interaction from the moment Fowler had reached for the book, and she had said nothing. The way most people say nothing when they are outnumbered by authority, even when authority is clearly wrong. But she had Chioma's number in her phone, and now she typed 2 words and hit send. Lobby. Now. Upstairs, in a room off the main conference corridor, Chioma Eze-Crawford was standing at the head of a long table, listening to her communications director review the speaking points for the keynote. She was 41 years old. She had spoken at venues on 3 continents, had been profiled in the Financial Times and the Report on Business, had sat across the table from prime ministers and pension fund managers and technology executives, who had initially underestimated her, and then spent the remainder of the meeting trying to recover from having done so. None of it had produced in her anything resembling complacency. She still listened the way she had listened in her mother's kitchen, when Loretta would sometimes describe a long shift. With her full attention, her hands still, her face open. She felt her phone vibrate in her jacket pocket. She glanced at it beneath the edge of the table. She stood up. "Move the briefing," she said, and before her communications director could ask to where or to when, she was already at the door. She took the stairs. The elevator was slower, and something in her body had moved into a register that would not tolerate slowness. She pushed through the stairwell door at the base, and the lobby opened up before her. She read the room in approximately 2 seconds, a skill built over years of walking into situations that required faster assessment than people typically expected of her. She saw the banner above the ballroom archway. She saw the man in the dark blazer, standing too close to an older woman near the center of the lobby. She saw the emerald dress. She saw the book. She crossed the lobby in long, deliberate strides. She stopped in front of her mother. She took Loretta's face gently in both hands and looked at her with the focused attention of someone conducting a private inventory of everything that might have changed in the time she was not there to prevent it. "Mama," she said softly, "are you all right?" Loretta exhaled, slowly, completely, and something in the composure she had been maintaining since the moment Fowler had first stopped in front of her chair shifted visibly. Not collapsed. Shifted, the way things shift when the person you have been holding yourself together for finally arrives. "I'm all right, baby," she said. "I'm all right." But Chioma had already seen the cracked screen, had already registered the slight redness at Loretta's wrist where the purse strap had pulled, had already composed, in the 2 seconds she had spent scanning the lobby, a clear and accurate understanding of exactly what had happened and in what sequence. She helped her mother settle back into the chair. She set the book carefully in Loretta's hands. She murmured something too quiet for anyone else in the lobby to catch. Then she stood, slowly, and turned to face Fowler. "What is your name?" she said. Her voice was the voice she used in boardrooms and in depositions, in the hallway conversations that determined the direction of $100 million decisions. Entirely calm, precisely because it was calm, something in Fowler's chest tightened before he had even answered. He gave his name. "And who authorized this interaction?" she asked. He began to explain the complaint from the 8th floor, the routine protocols, the lobby security guidelines. He was still speaking when she took out her phone, dialed a number, and said 4 words, "I need you downstairs." Then she ended the call and put the phone back in her pocket. Fowler stopped talking. The lobby had grown very still. The concierge at the front desk had not moved. The man who had been reading the Globe and Mail was watching without any pretense of doing otherwise. Faye, standing near the elevator bank, had not moved. The sound of footsteps came from the conference corridor, quick and purposeful. The executive director of the summit appeared. Gray-haired, immaculate, scanning the lobby with the expression of a man who has been informed that his keynote speaker has left the briefing room without explanation, and who has not yet fully arrived at the worst-case interpretation of that information. He saw Chioma. He altered his course immediately, stopping a few feet away, his voice careful. "Mrs. Eze-Crawford, the room is ready. 1,400 attendees. We were just." He stopped. He had taken in the full scene now. The duty manager, color draining steadily from his face. The security guard beside him, very subtle. The elderly woman in the emerald dress, seated, watching everything with the composed attention of a woman who has been watching things like this for a very long time. And above them all, stretched the full width of the archway, 20 feet overhead, the banner. He turned to Fowler, and he asked, in the quiet, deliberate tone of a man who already knows the answer and is asking only so the record will contain the question, "Do you understand who this is?" Fowler turned. He looked at the banner, at the photograph, at the name printed in letters large enough to read from across the lobby. He looked at it for several seconds, and the color that had been draining from his face completed its departure. Bryce did not look up at the banner at all. He was looking at the floor, and his expression was the expression of a person who has just understood, with full and sudden clarity, exactly what he has participated in. The hotel's CCTV was reviewed by the security director within 2 hours. 2 cameras, uninterrupted, 17 minutes from Loretta's arrival in the chair to Chioma's arrival from the stairwell. What the footage showed was, in the assessment of the hotel's own legal team, unambiguous. Loretta Eze could be seen complying with every request, providing identification without resistance, remaining seated and composed. Throughout an interaction, she had done nothing to invite and everything reasonable to resolve. Fowler could be seen lifting a personal item he had no authorization to touch, directing a junior guard to position himself against a paying guest, and escalating steadily past every point at which a reasonable person would have stopped. Bryce's own camera had recorded all of it. His face in the final minutes had recorded something that internal counsel would later describe in their notes simply as awareness. The particular look of a person who knows, in real time, that they are doing something they will not be able to explain. The general manager, Ms. Bergeron, appeared at Loretta's door at 3:30 that afternoon. She apologized in the careful language of someone who has recently consulted both a lawyer and a communications director, but whose distress was, to Loretta's eye, at least partially genuine. Fowler was suspended before the business day was out. By Friday of that week, he was no longer employed by the hotel. Chioma's legal team made inquiries. The hotel made an offer. Chioma declined it. She stood at the podium in the grand ballroom for her keynote at 11 o'clock, 40 minutes later than scheduled, in front of 1,400 people who had spent the intervening time speculating quietly about the delay and about what, exactly, had transpired in the lobby that morning, because word of it had reached the conference floor well before she took the stage. She spoke for 52 minutes about the state of technology investment in underserved communities across Canada. She spoke about the gap between the digital tools being built in Toronto and Waterloo, and Vancouver and the communities, rural, low-income, older, immigrant, that had the least access to those tools and often the most to gain from them. And then, toward the end of her address, she set aside her notes and looked out at the room. My mother came to this city yesterday on an overnight train from Halifax to surprise me, she said. She is 64 years old. She worked as a registered nurse for 31 years. She raised me alone on the salary of a public sector nurse in a province where that is not an easy thing to do. She does not have a company valued in the billions. She does not have a banner with her face on it in the lobby of a 4-star hotel. What she has is a kind of dignity that I have spent my entire adult life trying to live up to. And this morning, in the lobby of this hotel, a man with a walkie-talkie decided she did not belong here. The room was very quiet. I am announcing today that the Eze-Crawford Foundation will commit $25 million over the next 5 years to a digital literacy initiative for seniors and low-income adults across every province. The program will be called the Harrington Place Initiative, after the street in Halifax where my mother and I lived when I was 7 years old, and we had very little of anything except each other. It will begin in Halifax. It will reach every corner of this country, and it will be built on the principle that every person, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or whether anyone in the room has a banner with their name on it, deserves to be treated as though they belong exactly where they are. She stepped back from the podium and let the silence hold for just a moment. The applause started near the back and moved forward the way it does when something true has been said in a room full of people who were quietly waiting for it. Several people who had been in the lobby that morning and said nothing were in the audience, and they were the ones who stood first. Loretta was not in the ballroom. She had declined the offer of a seat at the back, telling Chioma she had not come all this way to watch from behind 1,400 strangers, and that she would find a cafe on King Street and wait. She was sitting with a pot of Earl Grey and an unfinished scone when the message arrived from Faye, a short video clip filmed on a phone of the last 60 seconds of Chioma's address. Loretta watched it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the city, moving past in the particular way of a Tuesday in November. Long coats, morning commuters, the gray sky pressing close above the buildings. She thought about Emeka the way she still did most days, and about what he might have said if he could have seen his daughter standing at that podium. She suspected it would not have been very different from what she herself was feeling, which was something so large and quiet. She could not have put it fully into words, the way the truest feelings usually resist being named. Her phone rang. I saw it, she said, before Chioma could speak. Are you all right? Chioma asked. I'm better than all right, Loretta paused. Harrington Place, you didn't tell me. I didn't decide until I was standing up there. There was a silence between them. The comfortable kind that belongs to people who have shared enough years that silence carries its own meaning and doesn't need to be filled with anything else. Come and have tea with me, Loretta said. I'm nearly out of scones. She heard Chioma laugh, quietly, and the sound of it settled over her like something she could rest in. 3 weeks later, back in Halifax, Loretta returned to her routine the way she always did. The morning tea, the 2 chapters, the walk to the library 2 streets, over where she helped sort donations on Tuesday afternoons and had done so for 7 years without anyone ever thinking to ask whether she found it meaningful. Because it was obvious, from the way she did it, that she did. An elderly regular who occupied the corner chair every Tuesday without exception acknowledged her return with a small lift of his newspaper. She acknowledged it with a small nod. That was enough, and it had always been enough. She did not speak to anyone about what had happened in Toronto, not because she was ashamed of it, but because what had happened in Toronto felt to her like a chapter in a book that was already being continued in the right direction, and she had never been the kind of woman who needed to read the same chapter twice. Her daughter called on Sunday evenings. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. Either way, it was the part of the week Loretta organized the rest of the week around. Not because she needed to, but because she had decided long ago that love, the real kind, the kind that shows up on overnight trains and in lobby floors, and in $25 million initiatives named after streets you used to struggle on, was simply not something you took for granted while it was still available to be held. She finished her tea. She put the book away. She walked home in the November light, her breath small and white in the cold air, the sidewalk familiar beneath her feet, the neighborhood folding around her like something that had always known exactly who she was.